Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to episode number 154 of Let's Go Racing. Tyler Jones, Dominic Aragon here with you as we are back, ladies and gentlemen. The NASCAR Cup Series making its return after 2 weeks off to Richmond Raceway. We'll preview that race this weekend. Also go to the top headlines in the sport, get to our mailbag segment as well before the end of today's show. Dominic, I got to be honest with you. The 2 weeks, I'm sure was nice for the drivers and teams to vacation, be with their families, have some downtime and all that. But I'll tell you, I was really missing racing. The Olympics and all that just wasn't doing it for me the last couple of weeks. I'm so glad that NASCAR's back and that we got some action to talk about here this week.
Certainly understandable. This will be the last non-NASCAR weekend that we had this past weekend until November. So we're going to have plenty of NASCAR action, 14 more Cup Series race weekends. Of course, the Xfinity Series is off too, but really cool headlines this week, which we'll get to. The NASCAR Truck Series is going to set their playoff field this weekend at Richmond. Impending weather. There's certainly a lot to talk about, Tyler. A lot to jam-pack before we get to the race weekend.
Yeah, and you looked at having these 2 weeks off. Going into this final stretch, the 14 races that we have remaining here, what a reset, right? I mean, it almost feels like the COVID times that we had when guys were off for quite some time. To have 2 weeks off, I know that, obviously it had to do with NBC and their TV contracts and all that, but this, if you're a guy that hasn't been running well, like a Kyle Busch or something, or if you're a guy that's been running great like Kyle Larson, I mean, I'm very curious of how these guys come back from this stretch, if they're going to be a little sluggish or a little remotivated, whatever you will. I mean, it seems like it's been forever since these guys have taken the racetrack.
Oh, it certainly has. I mean, we saw that Daniel Suarez raced, I believe it was in the NASCAR Brazil Series. Some of these guys kept their skills up. But I got to ask you, Tyler, and I know you can lend more self into this because you did play football. You've been more involved in sports than I certainly was. A driver like Kyle Larson versus a driver like Kyle Busch. Is more momentum killed for a driver like Kyle Larson, or is there more of a refresh, a reset button for Kyle Busch? Like, who has a better advantage heading into Richmond this weekend from that standpoint?
I don't have the answer, and I never like to cop out of any answers, but I could see it going either way, quite frankly. I mean, you look at Kyle Busch. He went with his family on a trip to Italy and Europe, and I'm sure he had a nice trip and everything, and maybe that was a chance for him to get away. Kyle Larson just hops into anything, and it's like he never left. I'm sure Kyle Larson's going to be fine. I think there's not a straightforward answer. I think it's going to be different kind of for everybody. Some guys will thrive off the break. Some guys are going to come off a little sluggish. I think it's going to be different for everybody.
Certainly. And gosh, what a great race weekend. I think, too, one of the highlights to look at, I think it's going to be really cool to see a driver like Riley Herbst running this weekend. Xfinity still has 3 weeks off. They have another week off. Oh, I should say 3 weeks collectively, one more week before they return to action with Michigan next week. But certainly really cool to see some of these guys running. Like, we'll see Parker Retzlaff in the Cup Series race this weekend. Some of these guys just can't stay away from the racetrack, Tyler.
Yeah, and it's wild to me that they're giving Xfinity 3 weeks off. And the trucks, of course, it's been a while since we've seen them race too. So now you get to really just put your pedal to the metal, if you will, as we go through this final stretch. 4 races remaining in the regular season until the playoffs officially get here for the Cup Series side of things. And let's talk about just kind of going into this weekend. We'll go over the point standings and all that here in just a second. But Richmond, I love the races that we've seen at Richmond. It's one of the bigger short tracks on the schedule. We've seen some exciting racing over the years, and I would think now is kind of put up or shut up time, if you will. We'll see drivers tend to be a little more aggressive from beginning with Richmond throughout the next few weeks with their last shot to make the postseason.
Certainly, and I think, too, when you look at Richmond, it is one of those cool, historical, unique tracks that's been on the Cup Series schedule since the 1950s. They've run the 2 races a year for a majority of its time on the schedule. When you can say that you've won a race at Richmond, you're putting yourself in really, really good company, Tyler. There's guys like Lee Petty, Tim Flock, Speedy Thompson to the King, Richard Petty, David Pearson, Dale Earnhardt, Bobby Allison, and you move forward to modern day, Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, Denny Hamlin. Some good drivers win at Richmond Raceway. And you hear drivers talk about how tough it is to tackle the track. You've got that big sweeping front stretch, the D-shaped oval that it is, and certainly how much with this playoff era that we've seen since 2004. We had him on the show here a couple of years ago. I think you called it best, pulling a Jeremy Mayfield. Looking at stories like that, Richmond has always produced some rich racing history, maybe an opportunity for that cream to rise to the top with veterans, but also some guys that need some good runs. There's a lot to look forward to this weekend, Tyler, with the races at Richmond. It'll be the 136th time that the Cup Series is going to Richmond Raceway. And I got to tell you, I'm really excited. I've been once. I went in 2018, that year that they had the overtime finish with Kyle Busch and Chase Elliott, and Busch outdueled him in overtime. Chase Elliott was still a winless Cup veteran at that time. So it was the recurring theme. When will Chase Elliott get that first victory? Kyle Busch picked up his 46th victory that night on a Saturday night. Really cool racetrack. I'll tell you, a lot of fun to shoot photos from, Tyler, but the fans do come out in Richmond, and it's such a cool racetrack.
When I think of Richmond over the years, like the number one memory that comes to mind is what Jeremy Mayfield did. Winning to get in the playoff before that was ever a thing. Win and you're in. Earning his way that night in the very first year of the chase back in 2004. That comes to mind. I also think about the first time winners we've seen over the years get it done, get their first career wins at this track. Casey Kane, Tony Stewart, just to name a few. This has been a good spot for that to happen. And then, my favorite moment was many years ago when we saw Kyle Busch and Dale Earnhardt Jr. go after it. And, Kyle Busch, wrecked Dale Jr. It was shortly after Dale Jr. took Kyle Busch's spot at Hendrick Motorsports and everything that unfolded there. I mean, there's been some great moments at this track over the years.
Oh, certainly. It's a great track with a rich history, and I'm glad we see Richmond still on the schedule because I know there's been a big revamp over the years and where to place where and what. And in a track like Richmond, to be able to have a playoff date, I had said it years ago, Richmond, Bristol, tracks like that should have a playoff date just because of the historical significance that they have on the NASCAR schedule. And maybe we don't get Richmond in the playoffs this year like we've seen in years past, but it's still really nice to see Richmond a part of the schedule. And we've unfortunately seen, Tyler, over the years, rain has been a part of that forecast. And of course, with the tropical storm this weekend, the Hurricane Debbie earlier this week, we got to keep that on the radar as well. No pun intended, of course, on that. But you have to keep eyes on that because we just really don't know. And in fact, the track has canceled some stuff already in the thoughts of keeping fans safe. Makes you really wonder, like, are we going to get a full race in this weekend? I know we're still a little bit ways out, but certainly Richmond and rainy weather tend to go hand in hand, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is. And the hurricane, obviously, you got to control what you can control. There's not much Richmond can do about that, but we do have the short track rain tires package as a possibility. But even with that said, Dom, big picture, it's not just even about getting this race in and trying to find a way to make it work with rain tires and all that. This is a damn hurricane we're talking about. It's about keeping people safe and out of harm's way that NASCAR and local officials have to manage here.
Absolutely. Oh, gosh, I wish we had Dante Ricci, our friend of the show, meteorologist up in West Virginia. He could give a lot more insight on this. But kind of just looking at the forecast too, Tyler, at the time of the taping on this, it seems like Friday's that big heavy rain day. Saturday's going to be all right and sunny, and Sunday's going to have its sunshine with partly cloudiness. But I know as those tropical cells move inland, they move along the land, they kind of weaken because they don't have all that water to churn and to gain momentum. So I'm hoping that continues. And of course, we know we have a lot of race fans that listen to us across the country. We hope wherever you are, especially if you're in the path of the storm, that you are staying safe, that you are staying well, and of course, listening to all the precautions of local authorities.
Absolutely. No question about it. The favorites this week, what's kind of that looking like? What are the odds stacking up for this weekend's race?
So I'll flip that on you. One thing we've been doing the last few weeks, and it's been fun with you and our guests, is to take a guess. Who do you think the fan favorite is and what their odds are? So let's throw that back at you. Opening odds before any car has taken practice or any time on the track. Who do you got, Tyler, and what are their odds?
I'll go Larson probably about at 500.
Very, very close. And Kyle Larson's at 650 plus 650 or 6.5 to 1. But he's the fourth favorite according to the
Really?
sportsbook.
Okay.
Christopher Bell is your odds-on favorite at 4 to 1 or plus
I'm
400.
surprised. I thought it would have been Larson or Hamlin.
You would think so. Denny Hamlin too, winning this race in the springtime. He's sitting at plus 500, 5 to 1. Martin Truex as well, who's winless this year, but has run exceptionally well at Richmond in the last few years, also at 5 to 1. This one kind of, I guess they have to go off historical data, but at the same time, during the season, Tyler, looking at who dominated this race, this exact race last year was the RFK team. Brad Keselowski sitting at 16 to 1 or plus 1600, and the defending race winner, Chris Buescher, at 18 to 1 or plus 1800. So still in the top 10, but certainly you're starting to flirt with some long shot odds, if you will. Kind of shocked they're not within that 1,000 or 10 to 1 or lower odds.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that that's the case there. You mentioned RFK Racing, and they've had some moments where they've looked really good this year. Brad Keselowski got to victory lane. Chris Buescher, the defending race winner here, he's trying to get in the playoff. He's still looking for his first win of the year. This could be a great opportunity for Chris Buescher here.
Oh, certainly, certainly. A driver that won 3 times last year, made it to the round of 8, and had that breakout performance. Chris Buescher's probably, arguably, Tyler, having the second best year of his career when you're looking at the numbers and how they've run every week. They just haven't been able to seal the deal. Got 4 race weekends left to do it. He's won at 2 of the remaining 4 tracks before, or 3 actually, excuse me, of the 4 remaining tracks before we get to the playoffs. That being, of course, Richmond last year, Michigan last year, and Daytona last year. I got to be feeling like if you're working with RFK Racing or you're on that 17 camp, I feel like there's some natural momentum or some natural just good vibes that would come with that.
Absolutely, of course. You know, walking into some tracks that he's performed well over the years. You want to be at your best, have your best opportunities as you're trying to make the playoff here at this point into this week. Let's talk about the guys that are on the bubble right now, that are on the outside looking in, starting with Kyle Busch. Uh, Dom, he's basically in a situation where he needs to win over the next couple of weeks and currently sitting right now at 112 points out in that 18th points position. What do you think? Does Kyle Busch find a way to win one of these next 4 races and make the playoff? If you had to put your money on it, do you think Kyle Busch finds a way to get in?
I can't believe I'm saying this, Tyler. I don't even think we would have been saying this last year. And I'd be curious to know if you agree with me. But in the event Kyle Busch wins over the next 4 weeks, the only viable option I see is Daytona. Now, of course, anybody could win at Daytona, and we know that could be a
Which is
great.
interesting because he's got a good track record at Richmond.
Yeah, he's won 6 times at Richmond, and he's a great short track racer. RCR cannot figure out their next gen short track program, which is weird. They look great every year with the opening race at the Coliseum, makes it look like they have their short track program figured out, and they don't. We've seen the raw speed that Kyle Busch can put up at the mile-and-a-half and those bigger tracks. Michigan could play into that. Darlington, anybody's guess. I got to feel like you're going to stack them, Tyler. Daytona would probably be his best shot. Then Michigan, then Darlington. And I'm sorry, but you got to just throw Richmond out. I think if there were odds on it, you're more likely to see Kyle Busch finish off the lead lap.
Yeah, and that's a harsh reality, but I don't think it's necessarily anything that he's done wrong. RCR is just not giving him what he needs. And if you need an example of it, that 3 team next to him, Austin Dillon, has been MIA. I mean, they've been nowhere to be seen this year.
RCR has been atrocious. Let's just put it nicely, Tyler. And the fact that this team won 3 races last year, we've seen Dillon win at Daytona in the next gen vehicle. We know they can get it done. Kyle Busch never forgot how to drive. But you look at a 112-point deficit with 2 races left, that's hard to make up. You can make up 59 points in a race. And mathematically, he could still point his way in the playoffs, but logically, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Other guys that are on the outside looking in, Bubba Wallace, 7 points back. I think similar to Kyle, I think that of the upcoming races, Daytona is the only one that he's got a shot to win at. But it's 7 points back, and guys like Chastain, Buescher, Gibbs there. Bubba, I think, can still point his way in, but I think he's the only one that can point his way in of the guys that are outside looking in right now.
Oh, certainly, certainly. And I think this is where you're going to see a lot of off calls with strategy and points and trying to pick up, maybe giving up a race win in favor of collecting 12 stage points across your first two stages because you're outside looking in, you're in this point bubble. We saw it in Daytona a couple of years, Tyler, where Martin Truex Jr., fifth in points, missed out on making the playoffs because he had missed a few stage points throughout the regular season. So it could come down to a situation like that. We could have four new winners, and we'd have the entire playoff grid made up with 16 different winners. So we won't have a situation potentially like how we did in 22, 17 winners, 26 races. And I feel like we don't get a new winner this weekend. Martin Truex Jr. is all but locked into the playoffs. But you're Ty Gibbs, you're Chris Buescher, you're Ross Chastain. You've got that fire under your pants right now. There's no guarantees. And of course, same with Truex, but I just don't see a viable pathway where he misses the playoffs at this point. We're going to a track. He can knock off that first win. This is all null and void. But that bubble, Tyler, is tightening up. And we've talked about it over the year, but I'm curious to know who you think of, not even the guys maybe we haven't even mentioned yet. Who is somebody outside looking in that could surprise everybody and win in any of the next 4 weeks, not just Daytona?
I think Chase Briscoe is the one that comes to mind. Been a while since he's got to victory lane. We know that he's going to Joe Gibbs Racing next year, and he would like to go in with some momentum. And his one win of his career in the Cup Series was at Phoenix a couple years ago, which is probably the track that's most similar to Richmond on the schedule. And he's a decent short track racer. Stuart Haas has shown some speed at times of this year. I wouldn't rule out Chase Briscoe. I'll say this, though, Dom. The top 16 right now, I don't think it's changing. I think that is the 16 drivers that will make up the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs when it's all said and done. Who is the driver of the four that doesn't have a win? Truex, Gibbs, Buescher, or Chastain that you see having the best shot to lock up a win in the next 4 weeks? I think any of the four can. I would lean towards Truex. I feel like that's an easy answer, but something tells me Ty Gibbs is very, very close to that first career win.
He's very close. He's won 2 poles this year. He has won a couple of stages as well. He's led a bunch of laps, and he's done it at different tracks. Darlington, Charlotte. He's been fast everywhere, and they had a great start. It seemed like they cooled through the summer, but he's still in playoff contention. We can't say that about Kyle Busch, who was once the points leader earlier this year. So certainly somebody like a Ty Gibbs wouldn't surprise me to see him win at any of the next 4 race weekends. Ross Chastain kind of shocks me because Trackhouse, had you told me that we'd have a Trackhouse driver that has won a race at this point in the year, I'd believe it. Had you told me it'd be Daniel Suarez, I wouldn't have believed it. Would have thought it'd been Ross at this point. But that number one team, they seem to be running better. And I feel like we see Ross Chastain win at some point. He's quietly good. He's consistently good. And maybe those numbers aren't there like we've seen in the past, but to be in playoff contention like he is right now, you still got to be picking up stage points, which they're doing. That one team's run really well, and we've seen them go deep into the playoffs. So I feel like there might be some momentum building there at Team Trackhouse. But the one I think that's go ahead.
Let me jump in here real quick. With Ross Chastain, too, I think it's worth noting. He's been a little quieter this year. He's not, wrecking guys left and right. He's matured as a race car driver, it seems, this year. But if there was anybody that felt like, hey, I need to be aggressive, I need to do whatever it takes to go get a win, even if I ruffle some feathers a bit to do it, Ross Chastain's your guy to potentially go balls to the walls here in these next 4 weeks and make sure he gets in the postseason.
Justin Marks tells him, cut loose, do what you got to do. He's going to do it. But I feel like maybe we have seen a little bit of restraint out of Ross Chastain over the last year plus or so. And then, too, Tyler, the last guy on that note, Chris Buescher, I think that's the biggest head scratcher of all of these guys that have yet to win inside the playoffs because he won 3 races as well. Like Truex did win 3 times too, but at least he's showing more speed. I feel like we've seen Chris Buescher just on that cusp. Sonoma was a close call. You were there for that Kansas race. He's been there. Shocking that the 17 team has not won yet this year.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Dom, let's make our picks here. Who gets it done this weekend at Richmond?
Well, I feel like you're going to see your winner come out of the Toyota camp. Toyota's just got this place figured out right now, as we saw in the spring. And you got to figure that's going to probably play into it going into this weekend. I think we see Denny Hamlin take that fourth victory of the year. Let's see you.
I'm going to go with the guy I started with, Kyle Larson. I think that Kyle Larson, that 5 team is clicking. They got things going right. This type of track is right up their alley. I'll go with Larson to get it done. So there you have it. That's our picks for this week. Plenty of news and headlines to get to, Dom. Where do we want to start?
Man, there's so much. I think we got to do a little crossover here, and I feel like you can really give some good insight on this. So earlier this week, on August 7th, on that Wednesday, Bristol Motor Speedway announced that there's going to be a Major League Baseball game at the world's fastest half mile. We've seen football there. We've seen dirt track racing. We're gonna get a pro sport there too with Major League Baseball. So the Cincinnati Reds will be taking on the Atlanta Braves at some point in 2025. The Athletic was the first to report this on Tuesday. CEO of SMI, Marcus Smith, long operation there with Bristol, long time face of the company, if you will. They're set to make an announcement at the time of this taping Friday morning at Bristol Motor Speedway. But Tyler, certainly a good little blend here of two professional sports. I'm curious how this layout would look. What do you think when you hear of this news, and how does this all play out?
I think it's fantastic. And Major League Baseball, they don't do a ton right, as their sport has gone down in popularity quite a bit over the last decade plus, and it's really become a regional sport, if you will. But one of the things they've done a really good job of is these events that are held outside the traditional stadiums, whether it's been the games at the Little League World Series that they've played, or doing the Field of Dreams game in Iowa, or they went back to the Negro League Stadium in Alabama this year. They've done this London series over the last few years that's been very successful. Up and down the line, this has been right up their alley. So with Major League Baseball involved, with Bristol Motor Speedway involved, there's no reason why this won't be a success. And the Atlanta Braves, they're the favorite baseball team of the South. This type of event, they're going to sell out. Every seat is going to be full in that place. You're going to get 160,000 people, set an MLB attendance record. I think it's going to be a tremendous night. I'm sure it'll be nationally televised and everything. And, you'll have some NASCAR twist to it, if you will. I think it's a great idea. I'm excited about it. And I think it's brilliant on both the part of Bristol and from the MLB side of things. And, to Bristol's credit, the great job they did with that college football game a couple of years ago with Tennessee and Virginia Tech. After that happened, then we were all sitting here saying to ourselves, was that just a one-off? Was that a one-time thing? Like, is this coming back? Is there going to be more football games, an annual tradition? And then nothing happened. And now here we are all these years later, and finally something's happening. I would love to see more of these type of events. And this might not be the last time we see, some type of big outside sports in a NASCAR venue. There's been deep discussions about, will the Jacksonville Jaguars renovate their stadium of playing their home games at Daytona?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that would be like a 2-year deal if that were all to go through too. So really cool to see a blend of it too. And I'm curious too. I mean, I kind of remember the football game, of course, but with the baseball layout, I got to figure you have Colossus. You got to take advantage of that. And wherever you set up the field, you got to take some sort of advantage there with the banking on the track. And I don't know. I feel like there's so many cool things you can do with Bristol Motor Speedway as a multi-facility or
Oh,
multi-facility.
of course. Yeah, there's plenty of things that you could do. And you got a passionate fan base and a place that everybody wants to go. Like, I would love to be there. And I'm not a fan of either one of these baseball teams, but it's going to be a historic night. And it'll likely be the most attended baseball game in history for a long time. I don't see that attendance record coming down by any stretch of the imagination. So, yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Certainly. So on our next
Dom,
news, yes.
what else?
So Toyota, and we'll put them in the spotlight here. We know they're going to probably run well at Richmond this weekend, but of course, the spotlight goes to David Wilson, longtime Toyota racing development executive, who has announced earlier this week that he's going to be stepping down his role from Toyota at the end of the year. David Wilson, who has been a staple, group vice president of TRD USA. He's been there 35 years, announced December 16th will be his last day with the company. He's been a fixture when it comes to Toyota racing and being that face for Toyota and helping with their NASCAR presence over the years and bringing the Toyota brand to motorsports across North America. And he joined TRD in 1996, or I'm sorry, his replacement joined TRD in 1996. So there's going to be long tenure here with Tyler Gibbs taking the role here, not Ty Gibbs, Tyler Gibbs, right? But yeah, certainly a big presence, and it should be noted too, his long history of working in corporations with Johnson and Johnson, and of course a military veteran as well in David Wilson. So certainly a decorated career serving our country and also serving in his roles that he has, but especially with that role at Toyota, certainly going to have that presence missed. And Tyler, I got to imagine that's going to be a big hole there because that is like the king, if you will, the Richard Petty of Toyota racing development. Certainly a big influence on motorsports in Toyota is due to David Wilson.
David Wilson's done an incredible job there with Toyota, building it from the ground up, that racing program. And, they don't have a ton of teams. They've embraced quantity, or they've embraced quality over quantity with just 3 organizations right now, with Legacy Motor Club, Joe Gibbs Racing, and then 2311. And I know that Legacy hasn't been great, but 2311 called on fast, and Joe Gibbs have been one of the top 2 teams in the sport. And it wasn't always easy. You go back to the early days with Michael Waltrip Racing and Red Bull and all that. I mean, it was a disaster. And some of these teams were looking over at Toyota and be like, I don't want to touch that. Like they are just a mess. But, they buckled down, they put it together. And I think all these manufacturers are looking over at Toyota and says, how can we be like them? Because it's not just what they're doing at the top in the Cup Series, but they've dominated the Truck Series for how many years? They've been really good in Xfinity and their development program. The best drivers right now that are coming through the ranks, for the most part, are coming up through the Toyota development program. And there was questions about, all right, what's that team going to look like without Kyle Busch Motorsports? And they said, not a problem. We're going to go invest in a Tricon garage. And they've made that work. And so I think everything about Toyota, what David Wilson's done, has been remarkable. But nonetheless, like what David Wilson's done, I think that they're going to be fine without him. I think they have enough people there that they know what they're doing, that it's bigger than one man now. But I would say that David Wilson deserves consideration for the NASCAR Hall of Fame for what he did with that Toyota program, building it from the ground up and being the guy that really got that thing going.
It wouldn't shock me if we see him on the finalist list down the road, certainly. And that longevity with Toyota and how far they've come in a short amount of time. We remember those days in the mid-2000s. Great in the Truck Series. That disastrous first year in 07. You remember those gas and go segments, NASCAR on Fox? They would ask the panel different things. They asked Darrell Waltrip, I think, at Talladega, will Toyota win a race? And I feel like he was obligated to say, yeah, of course they're going to win a race because my brother's got a team, but they looked awful. They had flashes of brilliance. And I remember when they made that transition in 2008, Joe Gibbs Racing from Chevrolet to Toyota, they had said they would never be the top Chevrolet team, that they would always be lower on the totem pole, but they knew they could be the top dogs with Toyota starting in 2008. We saw it, 8 wins.
People thought Joe Gibbs was crazy to go to Toyota too.
Oh, certainly. And Kyle Busch knocking off 8 wins the way he did in 2008, that first win for Toyota in the Cup Series in Atlanta early on in the year. And it has just continued from there, Tyler. Toyota and their dominance in the top 3 National Touring Series. Again, a lot of that wouldn't have happened without the direction of David Wilson and what he has brought to Toyota. That organization will sorely miss him. And of course, anybody can be replaced, but that is going to be a very hard replacement. That's a big shoe or big shoes to fill for Tyler Gibbs.
Yeah, certainly so. Dominic, what else we got?
So before we get on to Ask News and Notes, of course, got to spin it back a little bit to Richmond this weekend. So NASCAR updated the rule book this week, August 8th on Thursday, talking a little bit about the oval and the wet weather procedures we saw at New Hampshire where NASCAR was making the calls for the teams. What you could not do as far as what you could do on pit road and changing tires, etc. So moving forward with the wet tire package, teams will be permitted to change wets for wets or manage however they want to use their tires. And believe they have 4 sets for this race weekend with the wet tires. So NASCAR is not going to police it. They are going to let the teams decide for themselves how they want to do it. And of course, teams can also have the options to stay out, gain track positions if they so wish to do so, versus those who have entered pit road. So certainly, Tyler, NASCAR giving the option back to the teams and putting that back in the crew chief's hands and the driver's hands.
NASCAR changing the rules mid-season again. Imagine that. But even with that said, I do like this. This is the right call. Let the teams have the power. Let them decide for themselves. Because we saw, remember the Chicago race when some guys were like, we need to keep running slicks. Other guys were saying we need to keep running the rain tires. And there was a significant difference in speed between the rain tires and the slicks between the two. So I'm very curious how this is going to work out. Um, you know, I think there's a decent chance that somebody is too aggressive on slicks and that they're going to pay a price for it. That, you know, you have to think about, all right, we might be faster and we might get up front, but is it really worth it if we end up spinning out the car and wrecking here? I mean, that's a tough decision to make. And I think also one thing that people don't want to say, the quiet part out loud here, Dom, I think it comes down to talent level too. I trust Kyle Larson out there on slicks. I don't know if I trust Riley Herbst on slicks out there in that case. Like I think it depends on who the driver is to an extent.
Certainly, and I feel like maybe the guys, maybe there's a little advantage to the dirt guys like a Kyle Larson, a Christopher Bell, Tyler Reddick, Chase Briscoe, some of these guys that could have more of that feel underneath them. I feel like they might actually have an advantage.
I think so. I think so. This is right up their alley, if you will.
Certainly.
All right. And then one more note we had. Sounds like Haley Deegan, after getting released from AM Racing, might find herself in a good position next year.
Certainly, with Haley Deegan out at AM Racing like she was last year, some of the rumors talking about, of course, that she could be in line to take one of the Haas factory seats in the Xfinity Series. Of course, running the 00 in the 98, we know that Cole Custer, the defending series champion, will be moving back to the Cup Series, getting re-promoted in 2025. So that certainly leaves one vacancy. But with Riley Herbst also looking at Cup options, the potential for 2 open rides. We know those are quality rides too in that series. We know too when the announcement at Indianapolis with Cole Custer moving back to Cup, Joe Custer had said, and they have acknowledged that they have had conversations with Haley Deegan, but that would be addressed at a later time and place. But Tyler, that rumor mill heating up. Haley Deegan in a good Xfinity car. Got to imagine that her fans would love something like that. Plus, let's be honest too, it'd be really good for the sport. I think everybody would win in a situation if Haley Deegan could land one of those 2 rides.
Yes and no. The way I look at it, like I've seen enough from Haley Deegan where I say to myself, like, she's not going to do much for her NASCAR career. But the excitement level, she's still one of the biggest names in the sport, one of the most popular drivers, got the biggest social media following of any driver out there. It'd make things more interesting for sure, bring more attention to the Xfinity Series to have her in a more significant role. But what's she going to do with it? It kind of reminds me of a lesser version of Danica to an extent. Like Danica had talent, but she could never figure out how to drive a Cup car. If Danica would have stayed in IndyCar, she would have had plenty of wins, may have won an Indy 500 potentially, but I thought that was a mistake for her. Like the Cup cars, was never her thing. But we saw her run pretty decent in Xfinity quite a bit. Danica did. With Haley Deegan, I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it where I'm sold that, hey, that's somebody that's going to be around here a long time. And in the Truck Series, she was in very good equipment and really didn't do much with it. So, it's good for her. I'm happy for her, but I think that it might be a decision that this Haas factory team quickly regrets.
So let's play the prediction line here, the stat line. When we look at 2025, let's say she lands one of these cars. Both of them are good rides. Both of them have won races this year. 34 races in Xfinity. How many wins, top 5s, top 10s, laps led, and points would Deegan theoretically finish in a car like this next year?
I think she'd finish outside the top 20. No wins for sure. and maybe a couple top tens.
Okay. 2, 3 top tens in a 34 race season.
That's what I would see. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
What about you?
Yeah, I don't see it being much better. I feel like it would definitely be a step up for Mayhem Racing, but I can't imagine she'd put up Cole Custer numbers. I could see a couple of top five finishes, maybe some like 2 top 5, 6 top 10s, 17th, 16th in points, maybe be on the edge for a playoff position. But unless it's a restrictor plate race or a rain shortened event or something catastrophic, I don't see the victory straight up. I just don't at this time.
I agree. I agree. Dom, let's get to the mailbag segment this week. Time to answer some questions that you guys have sent us. DavidStarPodcast at gmail.com. Also on X and Facebook at Star Podcasts. You can reach out to us there. First question in the mailbag this week comes from Ari. Ari wants to know, guys of athletes in other sports, who do you think could potentially be a good NASCAR driver? Ari, that's a very good question. Dominic, I'll start with you.
Man, that's a really good question. I've been sitting there thinking about it since it was brought up. And gosh, and we're not talking like IndyCar crossover to NASCAR, nothing like that. We're talking like full on professional sports.
Right.
Man, I'm really thinking on that. I'll flip the reverse, and I'd be curious to hear what you think on this. Somebody like a Carl Edwards or Ryan Newman, I think could suit up and go play college football or be in the NFL. They've got the build for it, especially a Carl Edwards. I'd put him up in the NFL playing maybe like a defensive back or a strong safety kind of position. But as far as other athletes, I'm not really thinking of anybody that comes to mind. I'm sure there could be some good crossover, but it's just not striking a bell. Let's say you.
I think of instincts, right? Quick decisions. And what comes to mind is quarterbacks, point guards in basketball. I think like a Patrick Mahomes, a Tom Brady, a Peyton Manning, those guys, and granted too, like I'm not saying any of them could just hop in a NASCAR and learn how to drive tomorrow. If they would have grown up doing that, then maybe we talk about it. But to me, that's what I think of. Like the NASCAR driver, that's the quarterback of the team. The crew chief is the head coach. And you got to be thinking quick on your feet, be reactionary, be aggressive. That reminds me of a quarterback. So if you're a high level quarterback, if you're a Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, that's who I think would potentially translate to be a NASCAR driver. As far as that goes, Dom, is that kind of the thought process you'd have?
I would kind of agree with that. I would think so. Maybe like when you start naming names like that, like a Peyton Manning, somebody who can just process so many thoughts, and I love him. Like we go at him real quick. Think about like where you look at a quarterback on the NFL football field on any given Sunday. They have those little green dots on the back of their head, and that indicates that they're taking the orders from the offensive coordinator or the head coach. You look at Peyton Manning's Indianapolis Colts days. He didn't have that. He was the general on the field. He made the calls. He was trusted that much to make the call. So with all of what you have just said, somebody like a Peyton Manning in their prime, given some training and experience, would love to see what he could do behind the wheel of a car. And we know he's a NASCAR fan. We've seen him in broadcast booths over the years in the Cup Series. So I think Peyton Manning, being from where he is and going to school in Tennessee and just having that Southern upbringing, I feel like there could be a natural fit there with Peyton Manning behind the wheel of a race car.
Next question comes in from Jenny 8675309. Jenny wants to know, guys, who is a driver from yesteryear that you would like to see compete in today's form of NASCAR? And Jenny goes on to write, like she's saying specifically, like somebody that hasn't raced in a long time or maybe isn't alive, like whatever it may be. Who's a throwback name that you would like to see race in today's time if we could?
I got a couple here, Tyler. And by the way, we missed it on the news and notes too. Juan Montoya returning. That was a big piece. We'll have to talk more about that next week. But two names come to mind. Juan Montoya returning made me think Marcos Ambrose and SVG. And how would Marcos Ambrose do in a next gen car? Let's say Marcos Ambrose is 15 years younger in the prime of his racing career. Would love to see what he could do behind the wheel of a next gen.
Especially with a lot more road courses now.
Oh, absolutely. And he did at a time where there were just two in the Cup Series. Another one I would love to see because he cherry picked most of his career. He would have won a lot more races and championships had he run full seasons. David Pearson behind the wheel of the Wood Brothers 21 next gen car in David Pearson's prime. Let's see how really good that equipment is and how good the driver is. Because no disrespect to anybody else, but they haven't had consistency in that car. Nobody has been in that 21 car for more than 4 or 5 seasons in a very long time. David Pearson was that constant. I'd love to see a prime David Pearson run that 21 car and put them all to shame, Tyler. How about you?
Uh, I'll give you one name that's more recent. Um, I think prime Greg Biffle would compete for championships right now. He was one of the guys that just got stuck in a situation of bad timing where you had the greatest driver in the history of the sport, Jimmy Johnson, there. You had Jeff Gordon, of course. Tony Stewart in his prime years as well. Kurt Busch won a championship. Carl Edwards was competing for wins. You had Dale Jr. It was just bad timing for Greg Biffle. I think Greg Biffle at his prime was fantastic and won a lot of races, but the competition was so good that he didn't get to win a championship. I think that prime Greg Biffle, Dom, hot take, I don't think he would be much worse than Denny Hamlin.
50 plus wins, probably have a championship or two. And he said it on the show too a few years back that he just kind of went down with the sinking ship at Red Roush, and that loyalty cost him opportunities. And I remember he had chances to go to Michael Waltrip Racing, the Joe Gibbs ride, and he stuck it out with Roush, and that loyalty.
If he would have gone to Gibbs, he probably would have been a champion.
He would have had like the Matt Kenseth years that we saw in the mid 2010s. That would have been Greg Biffle, 7 wins a year, no question about it.
Yeah, prime Greg Biffle comes to mind as one of those that I'd like to see. And then just like as a throwback, I would have loved to seen just how Darrell Waltrip would go up against these guys. DW, his early years, he was kind of an angry dude. He would ruffle some feathers, and he kind of changed as he got older and such. I would love to see that angry DW racing against these guys, these young guys, and getting in their face a little bit. To me, I think that'd be great to watch.
Especially at a place like Bristol, Tyler, where he just flourished. He won 11 times in a row. Prime Darrell Waltrip in the next gen car at Bristol. Oh, that would be a fun sight to watch.
Yeah, I think so. Dominic, before we run here, what's going on in your world, my friend?
Yeah, staying here in New Mexico this weekend, having some good family time, quality time, and yeah, just kind of a home weekend, if you will, of sorts. But be back on the road here in a few weeks. Looking forward to being out at Atlanta Motor Speedway here not too distantly in the future, as well as some playoff races. And I tend to do my schedule like that on the racing season, Tyler, where it's front loaded and back loaded, and try to sprinkle some races through middle of the year. So it'll be ramping up here in a few weeks. How about you?
I am staying here this weekend. First weekend of the NFL preseason, so certainly excited about that. Covering that with the Seahawks and the Chiefs now, as I've taken over that channel for Chat Sports. So some pretty exciting stuff there, and just going to be kicking it. And this is one of my last few Sundays off this next month, so I will actually get to watch the race live on Sunday. Not going to have to watch it back later or catch the highlights or something like that. So I'm just looking forward, Dom, that we got NASCAR back, and that I can sit from my own couch and enjoy it all on Sunday here.
There you go. You're going to really enjoy that, my friend.
I can't wait. We'll put the checker flag out on this edition of Let's Go Racing. Make sure to subscribe to the show. New episodes out each and every week. Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. Also on YouTube as well. Leave us a 5-star review, or don't leave us one at all. Hit the like button on YouTube. We'd certainly appreciate it. Follow us on social media at Star Podcast on X and Facebook. You can also email us, davidstarpodcast@gmail.com. For Dominic Aragon, I'm Tyler Jones. So long. It's been another edition of Let's Go Racing. We'll see you next week.